Hello and welcome to Pluribus Unum's Fireside Chats. Not as good as FDR's, but hey, it's something. Reminder to ask questions for the Q&A that'll be coming up soon. I'll probably put a pinned thing here somewhere or whatever. You can ask it in that video, you can ask it in this video, I don't really care. 5-question limit, everybody. Here we go. With that out of the way, let's get right into the news. First, an update of the Kenya story. For those who don't know, Kenya had a very controversial bill that the incumbent president, William Ruto, wanted to push. And due to that, there were massive protests against his government, which ultimately culminated in him pulling the bill from being passed. Hooray, wonderful. But it turns out, he's going to do something a little bit more interesting than that. As CNN reports, Kenyan President William Ruto has fired almost his entire cabinet after weeks of anti-government protests, he announced Thursday. Only Deputy President Rigathi Gachagua and Prime Cabinet Secretary Musalia Mudavadi have been left in their post. And I think the only reason why those two are in their post is because he can't fire them. They're like the two positions that he literally cannot fire. And the reason that he has stated this is because, quote, even with the progress we've made, I'm acutely aware that the people of Kenya have very high expectations of me, and they believe that this administration can undertake the most extensive transformation in our nation's history. And it also goes on to say, Ruto said that he's engaging in extensive consultations to form a broad-based new government. So what I'm basically thinking is that he will probably just pick people from the opposition that he has some favorable views towards, add them to his government, and hopefully will quell any opposition for the time being. Speaking of opposition, Jeremy Corbyn is back. We know he was back already. He won his seat back in Parliament. And one interesting thing that I saw that was trending on, it wasn't trending, but it was being floated around on Twitter. It was the fact that multiple MPs who were literally swearing themselves in were literally just like, this is stupid. They just really did not like the fact that they were swearing to King Charles. Clive Lewis, the Social Democratic and Labour Party people, and apparently even Jeremy Corbyn, who was helping some people who were new members of the UK government to swear in. And then he was caught on a hot mic saying, this is really stupid, isn't it? Honestly, way more base than I thought. Even to an extent, a lot of the base Labour Party people are still kind of not based when it comes to a lot of things. The monarchy, Ireland, and Scotland. And for some reason, it looks like Corbyn is just being based on all of them as well. Because he also said that he supports a second independence referendum for Scotland. But anyways, why am I talking about Corbyn? Well, Corbyn has basically revealed that there were some people who kind of speculated what would Corbyn do once he got back into Parliament, and a lot of people kind of just thought he'd just go back to the backbench and then he just, some people even suggested one of the fucking left-wing Labour MPs literally said one of the things that he would try to do is try to bring Jeremy Corbyn back into the Labour Party, which I found very weird because I knew that that wasn't allowed. As Corbyn himself stated when he was the leader, if you run against the Labour Party, you can't run again. You can't join the Labour Party for 5 years. And there was very little speculation that he would rejoin the Labour Party. But there were some people who were okay, but literally, what will he do next? Will he just go back to the backbench and just be an MP behind the scenes and just work for his constituents in Islington North? Or would he attempt to do something bigger? And it looks like Corbyn's actually planning to do something bigger, probably inspired by the fact that there were 4 other leftist independents that were elected to Parliament in this election. And Corbyn's basically he wrote to The Guardian, basically explaining that all these things he wants to do. And one of the things that he plans to do is to hold monthly people's forums, which he describes as, quote, a shared democratic space for local campaigns, then trade, tenants, and debtors unions, because that's what he did when he ran in Islington North. But the bigger thing that has caught my eye in this press report is when he addressed speculation about potentially forming a brand new political party. Because another thing that some people have been speculating is that he could potentially join George Galloway's Workers' Party. To which I was absolutely not. There's no way in hell they would do it, because Jeremy Corbyn is a supporter of things like trans rights, and he's like an actual socialist. Galloway's a fascist. And Corbyn revealed that, quote, he has no doubt that his movement will offer an electoral challenge capable of challenging the stale two-party system, but he will hold off on actually doing anything of the sort until he's able to build community power from below. Make no mistake, this is just the beginning of a movement that can win with and for the communities all over the country. And oh boy, I have a lot of things that I would wish would happen with this. I would love if Corbyn was able to negotiate. Like, I know all of this is like purely speculative fantasy. It's never going to happen. But can you imagine if Jeremy Corbyn was able to negotiate with all of the left-wing parties outside of the Labour Party and Workers' Party, but they're not left-wing, but like work with like Sinn Féin and Plaid Cymru and Scottish National Party, and convinced all those left-wing Labour MPs to leave the Labour Party and join him in this brand new endeavor, then convinced these 4 new Muslim Arab independents to join his bid as well. Dude, Corbyn would be fucking unstoppable. He would be unstoppable. And if not, he would be able to be a actual viable left-wing force in the side of the like establishment. Quite genuinely, Labour is fucked in the future, and I am here for it. I am here for Corbyn to literally take them to the curb, form the new Popular Front in fucking UK. Let's go, gang, let's go. UK maybe not be dead after all. Speaking of not dead, the Cárdenas family, Lazar Cárdenas Patel, is apparently going to join Claudia Sheinbaum's administration. But here's the kicker. He's not going to be joining. Like, if you pay attention to Mexican politics, you may kind of know about the long-standing divide between AMLO and Cuauhtémoc Cárdenas. Those two just fucking hate each other. Like, they just hate each other. I've talked about this before in a previous episode, but TLDR, Cuauhtémoc Cárdenas was the leader of the PRD, and he was planning to run for president for a long time. Basically, I think he wanted to be the candidate of the party for life. He was the de facto candidate for the quote-unquote party in 1988. He was the party's candidate in 1992. It's 1994. He was the candidate's party in 1994, and he was the party's candidate in 2000, and was planning to run as the party's candidate in 2006. But then, AMLO won the PRD straw poll to be the candidate, and Cuauhtémoc basically was just like, oh, well, I'm fucked then, and got so pissy, he decided to not endorse AMLO come the election. He didn't endorse anybody else, but he never gave his support to AMLO, which caused the PRD to call him out on this, be like, dude, what the fuck? Why are you doing this? And that led to him and AMLO basically hating each other for a long period of time. That combined with the fact that he also hates Porfirio Muñoz because he screwed him out of getting the PRD nomination in like 2000, I think. Basically, he was just really interested. He just really wanted to be the party's candidate. Whether it be for good reasons or bad reasons is yet to be determined. But he just really wanted to be the party's nominee. And when people who wanted to be the nominee as well fought against him, he wasn't so happy about it. Like, I mean, Cuauhtémoc has never endorsed AMLO's bids for president, and they just have very harsh criticisms towards each other. But there was a temporary ceasefire when AMLO appointed Lazar Cárdenas Patel, Cuauhtémoc's son, to be a member of his presidential cabinet. He was basically, and the position he was given was like the head of the president's office. Essentially the chief of staff position. I think that's what it's supposed to be. It's basically a nothing position. It doesn't really matter. And that's the position that he has in Claudia Sheinbaum's administration. Probably, again, to make sure that Cuauhtémoc Cárdenas has a ceasefire with MORENA. There's not much else to say about that one. I just thought this was funny when I first saw it. It was just pretty funny. The next news story is a very controversial news story. And, well, there's no beating around the bush. It turns out that Democratic Socialists of America has officially revoked their endorsement of Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. And there are a lot of people who are talking about it. Here is apparently the official statement of the party to explicitly explain why they did not, because there was a drama going on about like whether or not they should even endorse her in the first place. And then they never really did. At least the New York DSA officially endorsed her. And then by extension, the national DSA said, okay, fine, we'll endorse her as well. But then came this. And, well, turns out a lot of things have been going on. So, okay. On Sunday, June 23rd, the DSA National Political Committee voted to endorse Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez so long as she fulfills the following conditions: publicly opposes all funding to Israel, including the Iron Dome, participates regularly in the DSA Federal Socialist in Office Committee, publicly opposes all criminalization of anti-Zionism, such as bills advancing the IHRA definition, which conflates criticism with Israel with anti-Semitism, publicly support BDS, boycott, divest, and sanction to end Israeli settler colonialism. The initial endorsement request was considered upon request of New York City DSA Steering Committee. Earlier this week, the NPC received a request from the NYDSA to withdraw the endorsement because it took place after the New York Democratic primary, and they did not expect the conditional endorsement or feel it was strategic. Because we have not seen evidence of AOC meeting these conditions, and at the request of the NYC DSA, the NPC is withdrawing our conditional endorsement of Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, although she will remain endorsed by our New York City chapter. So basically, from what I'm gathering, it seems that the New York City DSA wanted to just endorse AOC without any questions. But then, they pressured the national DSA to endorse AOC, again, with no standards. And the national DSA said, you know what? We will decide to endorse her on these conditions. And then the NYC DSA said, that's a bit weird. Can we just not do this? Especially considering apparently they didn't endorse her in the primary. They endorsed her after she was won her re-election. So it's what's the point? But let me read it continuously so that there's no minced words in what they say. In the last several months, thousands of DSA members provided input about the perspective of a national endorsement through town halls, meetings, and engaging with their chapter discussions, and AOC was invited to speak out on member forum. Many members have supported national endorsement, while at the same time demanding that AOC demonstrate a higher level of commitment to Palestinian liberation, self-determination, and the immediate end to the heinous genocide in Gaza, committed by Israel that aligns with the DSA's position and expectations of socialists in office. We recognize AOC has taken courageous positions on Palestine, such as co-sponsoring several House resolutions, naming Israel's genocide as well as opposing House Resolution 894. However, members have raised their concerns regarding a number of her votes, including a vote in favor of HRes 888, conflating opposition to Israel's right to exist with anti-Semitism. AOC also co-signed a press release on April 20th, 2024, that supports strengthening the Iron Dome and other defense systems. Finally, AOC hosted a public panel with leaders of the Jewish Council for Public Affairs, lobbyists from the IHRA definition of anti-Semitism. On this panel, anti-Zionism and anti-Semitism were conflated, and boycotting Zionist institutions was condemned. This sponsorship is a deep betrayal to all those who've risked their welfare to fight Israeli apartheid and genocide through political and direct action in recent months, and in decades past. A national DSA endorsement comes with a serious commitment to the movement for Palestine and our collective socialist project. We must endorse candidates who enthusiastically seek a relationship with the DSA and the National Political Committee, as the highest body of the organization between conventions is responsible for setting the criteria we establish for national endorsements. Chapters have a responsibility to make this clear to their endorsed candidates when applying for a national endorsement. The NPC is committed to ensuring that all of our elected officials are unabashed in their support for Palestinian freedom. To build a socialist movement that's capable of defeating capitalism, we must demand more from leaders in our movement. Now, there are a lot of things we could say about this. And to me personally, I say that while I don't necessarily agree with the idea of unendorsing AOC, I completely understand why they did it. I mean, it makes sense. To me, it just makes sense. If they gave her these standards and she didn't fulfill them, then I guess technically, yeah. And I mean, of the left-wing orgs, like, DSA is the most picky. I mean, literally look at their fucking, like, DSA, like, electoral.dsausa.org, and it shows, like, their endorsed candidates. It's like, they have, like, literally 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 candidates, and, like, 3 ballot measures. It's like, really? There's no other candidates that you could think of that you can endorse? Some say this may be like a drama thing. Like, I think like there's some people who argue like behind the scenes this is actually like a little different. But again, I think literally if that's just the standard that they have, it's just like it makes sense. Speaking of standards, the standard of Republican candidates in my state is low because, oh boy, I know this is not a story about Mark Robinson, because a lot of people have been making like, Mark Robinson said a lot of fucking crazy things. This is a different Republican candidate in this race. Superintendent candidate Michelle Morrow. This is the woman who is trying to run our schools. And this isn't the first time that she's said like she's done really fucking stupid things. She's first of all on the record saying that she wanted like a pay-per-view, like live execution of Barack Obama. And her most recent thing has gotten her in a lot of shit as well. According to this, here is her plan. Like, she's like, because this is something that's like a little bit old, but it's like been redug up. But oh boy, it is her plan to tackle gun control, because like one of the big things people say, like, we stop guns in schools, and here is her plan to stop guns in schools. Michelle Morrow says, and I quote, "My plan to stop people from having guns in schools. 1. Controlled entry and exit doors, SROs, and metal detectors. 2. Video surveillance in classrooms, hallways, and bathrooms. 3. Immediate expulsions for the remainder of the year for any violations. 4. Charge parents if it is their gun." Now, if you were half paying attention, you might not have noticed what has been said. But Michelle Morrow literally just said that she wants to put cameras in school bathrooms. Let me say this again. Michelle Morrow, the Republican candidate who wants to run schools, wants to put cameras in the school bathrooms. Pedocon theory keeps getting proven right, boys. And with, like, I mean, there's really not much else to say except she's a fucking crazy idiot. And with that out of the way, let us move on to the main topic of this video. Today's episode, we'll be talking about a country who has had no controversies and no issues ever in their politics or in their history. Venezuela. There's absolutely nothing interesting that happened in the country of Venezuela, especially since the year 1998. I guess they did one thing. They elected this guy named Hugo Rafael Chavez Frias, and he became president of the nation. He was a member of the military that attempted to overthrow the government of Carlos Andres Perez after Carlos not only tried to implement the International Monetary Fund-backed policies, but also when Perez decided to order members of the military to kill protesters. Like, yeah, that was a big thing. Like, not only did he try to implement IMF-related policies that was going to hurt the populace of Venezuela, but when they decided, hey, we don't like that, we're going to like protest against you, he ordered the military to start sicking them, like to start killing them. Allegedly, Hugo Chavez did not participate in the killings, not due to any moral reason, but because he was sick. But I think he would have probably like rejected it regardless. But anyways, he ended up like trying to commit a coup, and like because a lot of members of that, like some of the people that he specifically sent to that area to do the job, they felt remorse for their actions. And then Chavez basically said, "Hey guys, crazy idea. What if we do this? What if we overthrow the Venezuelan government?" I'm just saying. And they actually tried to do it. Chavez failed, and I think he got arrested for a little bit of time, but then he ended up getting out of jail because people were like demanding that he got out of jail. And they're like, "Okay, Chavez, you can get out of jail, but don't do anything crazy." And he's like, "Okay, I won't. And then decided to run for the presidency of Venezuela and win. And ever since that day, Hugo Chavez would become a very, 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 very controversial figure due to him pushing for a lot of different things in his administration and worldwide, including but not limited to the ideologies of Chavismo, Bolivarianism, and socialism in the 21st century. Now, if you're one of those people that go, what's the difference? Well, I actually made a video talking about it, with Chavez's election serving as the catalyst for the beginning of what we know today as the pink tide, or Marea Rosa, with many people pointing out the fact that without Chavez showing that it was possible, then many of the Latin American left-wing governments that a lot of us know and love today, such as Evo, Lula, and many others, probably would not exist had it not been for Chavez's victory. And there are a lot of people who have a lot of different takes on Hugo Chavez. And, well, let's just say, like, a lot of them are... It is very propagandized in every single direction in regards to it. To many, especially in the West, they consider Hugo Chavez as an evil, despotic dictator who was trying to ruin Venezuela, democratic backsliding, blah, blah, blah. He's the next Stalin or whatever. And to many others, particularly in Latin America and some, like, anti-Western countries like Russia and China, he's considered a great man, one of the greatest leaders of the 21st century. And especially if you're on the left, a lot of you people might go like that as well. Although I think, like, depending on your, like, left-wing bend, you either think that he is one of the greatest, or, like, you think, oh, he's just another capitalist or whatever. Now, to show how stupid I am, I didn't know about Venezuela and all the controversy and all this stuff about Venezuela until 2019, because that's when the US started doing its little shenanigans. I wonder what 2019 me had to say about Hugo Chavez in Venezuela. And there are some fascistic tendencies that Hugo Chavez had to do in order to get there. I mean, on a technicality, I was right. Hugo Chavez did do the quote-unquote fascistic tendency of running in an election and winning, you know, like Hitler did back in the 30s. But how does 2024 Pluribus Unum feel about Hugo Chavez? He's alright. I clearly lean a lot more in a different direction, and there were a couple of reasons why I leaned in a different direction, and it's basically involved this very interesting thing. It's called, looking into Hugo Chavez. Who would have thought looking into a public figure could actually lead you to believe that they had a good idea or a bad idea? Who would have guessed? And there was like there's a documentary it was made in 2017 called Chavez. It's on the streaming service Tubi. I haven't seen it in a while, but I'll watch it again at one point. But it basically detailed a lot of, like, the life and, like, what he did and stuff, and it's like, I thought that was pretty fine. And here's an Empire File. Like, Empire Files did a pretty decent, like, debunking of, like, John Oliver's, like, shittiness on Hugo Chavez. And I'll just repeat some of the numbers that they have here because it's interesting. First of all, like, this is basically, like all of this really just shows, explains really why I'm pro Chavez. And look, poverty rate before Hugo Chavez, 43%. Under Hugo Chavez, 26%. Extreme poverty was 17% before Chavez, 7% during Chavez's tenure. The amount of people who received pensions went from 387K to 2.1 million. Malnutrition went from 21% to 2%. Unemployment went from 17% to 6%. Infant mortality rates went from 20 per 1,000 kids to 10 per 1,000 kids. The amount of Venezuelans in public schools went from 6 million to 13 million. And illiteracy went from 17% to 1%. Like, shit on all the other things we want. Chavez got results. Like, he got fucking results, man. There are a lot of factors you could say as to why Hugo Chávez's administration went as well as it did, and there are a lot of things you could say. Like, for example, Hugo Chávez, his party basically exploded in popularity to the point where he literally did not have any viable opposition. Some people would say, oh, well, there was election rigging or blah, blah, blah. But, I've talked about this in the past, and if you just analyze how the elections went, it just doesn't make any sense for there to be, rigging, because you're just Chávez became so popular, and then the opposition was we don't think the election is going to be fair, so we're going to boycott the elections. And then they lose. Then they claim, rigged. Then, since they don't have any actual viable infrastructure, when they inevitably do have to run for the elections, they massively flop, and then they go, see proof that it's rigged. We didn't get a decent amount of support. It's yeah, because you have no viable infrastructure. Which meant that Hugo Chávez really didn't have that much competition in regards to actually vying away votes. Another one was the fact that oil prices were massively high, and Venezuelan based a lot of its economy on its state-run petroleum industry. And some believe that it was Chávez himself who was a deity among men, who was truly the next in line after Jesus. Yeah, that's interpretation, all right. But, unfortunately, all good things must come to an end. And, unfortunately, Hugo Chávez was diagnosed with cancer, and then died of that cancer. Oops. What happens now? Well, his vice president, Nicolas Maduro, took over as the presidency. And, unfortunately, Maduro ain't no Chávez. And Venezuelans understand that he ain't no Chávez. And, well, problems that were somewhat prominent in Chávez's tenure, during the end of Chávez's tenure, right as he was dying, that's when oil prices started to plummet. So then it's okay, so then they started seeing a little bit of the badness coming. But then, when Maduro took over, the prices had completely dropped, and bad things started becoming way more noticeable. Not helped by the fact that the United States started putting a lot of economic sanctions on Nicolas Maduro and the Venezuelan government, which made the economic situation 10 times worse. Well, I don't know if that's statistical proof, but it just made it worse. And let's be real, Maduro's just not as cool as Chávez. He's just not. I mean, I'm sorry. He's just kind of cringe. And, well, the opposition started getting a little helping hand from the United States because they couldn't beat Chávez, but they could beat Maduro. Unless you're one of those conspiracy theorists, like Maduro, who believe that Hugo Chávez got cancer because of the United States. Sure, whatever. Anyways, what ended up happening is that the president of the National Assembly, Juan Guaido, declared that due to alleged fraud that took place in the 2018 election, due to the fact that, again, the opposition decided to boycott and didn't want to waste any time actually running viable candidates, he would invoke Article 233 of the Constitution and assume the presidency until new elections could be held. And he became the face of the Venezuelan opposition for a little bit. Everyone was oh, cool, whatever. And it seemed that Maduro, I keep thinking Chávez, Maduro really just seemed to let him do whatever the fuck he wanted for a while. That was until Juan Guaido started announcing that he was literally going to try and kill Maduro, and that he was ordering members of the Venezuelan military to overthrow Maduro, and that if he does, then he'll give them pardons when he becomes president. Maduro was okay, fuck you, dude. And then just started going on the offensive against him. I think there was a literal coup attempt. Basically there was a protest, and then, he tried to get some, defectors to join him, and it didn't really go out well. Guaido fled, and basically nothing happened for a while. Venezuela just kept chugging along, doing whatever the fuck they wanted. Meanwhile, the US kept chugging along, wanting to do whatever the fuck it wanted. But with this upcoming election, things are happening again. And some of the bad things that some people have levied towards other people, you'll kind of see what I mean when I say, broadly, oh, Maduro is no Chávez, or Chávez is not Maduro, when I get into some of the issues and some of the other things that go on. Alright, so let's just get into it. What are some of the issues in regards to this election? First, there's the Guyana Esquiva. I'm going to talk a lot more about this later in the episode, but shorthand, it's an issue that might be playing a big role. Jailing of the political opposition. there are quite a number of political opposition figures that have been jailed, or I think mostly jailed, house arrest, whatever, since Maduro took power. And there's sort of like this thin line about like, do these people actually deserve to be arrested? Or like, oh yeah, but they did technically deserve to be arrested, but the only reason why it's being levied towards this politician is because this politician is an anti-Maduro politician. Like a member of Maduro's party would not be like in jail for the same crime. Generally, this election will be seen as a quote-unquote referendum on Chavismo, because Chavismo is still the prominent political ideology of Venezuela. Like, Hugo Chavez has a cult of personality surrounding him. There's no shame in admitting it. It's just real. Hugo Chavez has massive, like, one of the major, like, symbols of Venezuela, and, like, the party of Maduro is literally the eyes of Chavez. They're supporters that literally get the eyes of Chavez tattooed on their forehead. And last major issue, before we get into this, is relations to the USA. Alright, let's get into the candidates. There are 10 political candidates in this upcoming Venezuelan presidential election. And I'll be going over them all. And some have more to say than others. Let's just say. I guess we'll start off with the big man himself, Nicolas Maduro, the current president of Venezuela and the former vice president of Venezuela. He is running under the alliance called the Simon Bolivar Great Patriotic Poll. For those who don't know, Simon Bolivar is a Latin American revolutionary who liberated a lot of is one of the reasons why Latin America is kind of what it is, because he liberated a lot of Latin American countries from the Spanish Empire. And Hugo Chavez takes, Hugo Chavez took Bolivar, Bolivar is my inspiration. He is why I'm doing what I'm doing. Kind of implying, yes, I am the new Bolivar. Kind of why, the country's literally called the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela. That's how, close it is. This Great Patriotic Poll is kind of like, what's the fucking name of the fucking, Chinese, I mean, I gotta be real, it's, literally, that's kind of the point of it. It's, the Patriotic Poll. It's kind of, the de facto, alliance of, the true countrymen or whatever. The primary party of this coalition is the United Socialist Party of Venezuela, or PSUV, a merger of Hugo Chavez's Fifth Republic movement and smaller political parties that were made to basically rebrand and consolidate power during Chavez's last years on, I think it was kind of seen as, he was kind of okay, I am dying, so I'm going to try and, make things better, give an easier chance for my successor, i.e. Maduro. And there's only one other party that I will technically mention as a member of this alliance. And that is the Communist Party of Venezuela, a Marxist-Leninist party that endorsed Maduro in the last election, but not as an official member of the poll. Technically, the Communist Party of Venezuela is in a separate political alliance. There's technically 3 major political alliances in Venezuela. Technically, there are a lot more, but in the legislative chamber, there's the Great Patriotic Poll, the Opposition Alliance, and then there is the Popular Revolutionary Alternative. Basically, it is parties that, it's a very rare example. It was parties that were critical of PSUV from the left. Because that's one of the big criticisms a lot of people have with the opposition. That it's they're all corporate bought stooges and whatever. But this is the one party that could kind of circumvent this. And coincidentally, this party is not that popular. They have only one elected member of the government. And, well, it's not really that impressive. But you might say, wait, this party, basically, it's funny. They endorsed Maduro to kind of get, his good graces. Then they elected one MP, or one deputy. And then, immediately afterwards, the guy said, yeah, fuck you, Maduro, and then just started, criticizing him. He maintains that the party is not technically, let me check again, it's technically not a Chavismo party. I think maybe the alliance is, probably lists itself as Chavismo. Yeah. the alliance lists itself as like Bolivarianism or Chavismo, but it's still like Marxist-Leninist. They kind of call themselves, I think one of them literally says Trotskyists. I think it's just because there are like a ton of like smaller left-wing parties that do endorse them. But again, the Communist Party of Venezuela is the only one that actually has like a big viable alternative. Like a quote-unquote big viable alternative, 1 MP. But you might be thinking, well, if they're endorsing him this time, then I guess they worked out their problems, right? Well, that did not happen, because what has been going on is that Maduro has been targeting opposition parties. Not all of them, but smaller ones that kind of he doesn't like. Like, I think he announced that there were a lot of parties that, due to the fact that they weren't filing candidates in enough elections, they would just be removed from the registry. Even though there's supposed to be a thing where you say, hey, you can do this thing instead. And one of the things that happened was that Nicolas Maduro, one of his primary targets, was the Communist Party of Venezuela, because they were the only party that criticized him from the left. So, what he did was he told some people from PSUV to infiltrate the party, take it over, and then that faction of the party endorses Maduro, and since they kind of became the de facto leaders of the party, they're technically the party itself endorses Maduro. And that's another thing that's a problem with like Venezuelan opposition parties. There are a lot of them that literally will just split off and just take factions with other parts. And it's just like, great. You wonder why the opposition doesn't do well in Venezuela. They literally just cannot fucking fathom the idea of like, we should unite and work together. But yeah, Maduro, he's got the left vote, quote unquote, like cornered, whatever. Okay, so who are the people who are challenging him? Will they be any more viable against Maduro? Well, according to this, the first major opposition candidate is Daniel Ceballos, the former mayor of San Cristobal, who was arrested for protesting against the arrest of another opposition figure named Leopoldo Lopez. Yes, you heard that right. Daniel Ceballos was protesting the arrest of a political figure, and in turn, what they did was arrest a political figure. Not beating the allegations, buddy. So, he is running under the banner called Aripa, a digital party focused on tech, I guess. I mean, I can't really find anything about it. He literally just formed this party specifically to run in this election. Not really an important person, really. Next person is Antonio Isari Angola, a counselor from Chacao. His party is not... Sorry, I read the name, and I'm pretty sure I'm mispronouncing it, but immediately I thought Lightning McQueen Chacao. Or no, somebody says, he says Cachao. If this episode sounds really fucking weird, it's because it's 3 a.m., almost 4 a.m., when I'm recording this, because of procrastination, I guess, or stress or whatever. Alright, so his party is known as the Pencil Alliance, which espouses an ideology called ordoliberalism, a German branch of economic liberalism that is agnostic on the welfare state. Interesting. Anyways, next candidate is Enrique Marquez, a former national deputy and election official in Venezuela. His party is known as Focused on the People, but he is interesting because he is also endorsed by the anti-Maduro faction of the Communist Party, including their one sole deputy, Oscar Figueira. Yeah, they held a press conference and he is their nominee. Interesting and based. And one interesting thing that I should mention is the fact that Oscar Figueira, like, I literally looked at the National Assembly's, like, site when I was doing research for this episode, and one of the things I did, I was like, because, like, they did the thing where, like, you can click the parties and then see who they have elected. And I clicked the PCV, the party, like the Partido Comunista Venezuela, and they showed no results. And I was confused. I was like, huh? Did he get removed or whatever? But go to the website yourself, and you'll see that Oscar is literally listed as a PSUV member. He is not a PSUV member. I wonder if this has to do with the fact that Maduro literally took over his party. The next candidate is Luis Eduardo Martinez, former governor of Monagas, running under a faction of the Democratic Action Party, a social democratic party that used to be Venezuela's dominant political party. Next is Jose Brito, a federal deputy, running under the Venezuela First Party, a liberal democratic political party. Next is Javier Bertuzzi, an evangelical pastor and third-place finisher in the last presidential election, i.e. 10% to the second-place finisher's 20% to Maduro's 67%. So not that impressive, honestly. And again, that was because the major opposition bloc did not run a candidate in that election. The next candidate is Claudio Fermin, a perennial presidential candidate. His political party is Solutions for Venezuela. It's a third-way political party. Nothing really that interesting. The next candidate is Benjamin Rauso, a stand-up comic who is running basically to make fun of Chavismo and the opposition. Not really anything interesting. Now you might be wondering, okay, these guys suck. I mean, is there anybody else who actually is a viable candidate against Maduro? Well, believe it or not, there actually is. Edmundo Gonzalez, a person who has a career in presidential politics as he was an ambassador to 2 Venezuelan presidents. Alright, who were they? Carlos Andrés Perez, okay, and Hugo Chavez. Interesting. He is running under the massive anti-Chavismo coalition, the Unitary Platform. It's broadly a big tent movement. There are some parties that technically identify as center-left in the coalition, but broadly the party is a centrist and broadly capitalistic party that wants to open the markets to like outside country, to open the markets. He's basically the one of the biggest reasons that a lot of people are like, okay, but how come he gets to say? Like, some people criticize, like, what are the other opposition figures? These ones got arrested. Why does he get to stay? And it really seems to be because Edmundo Gonzalez is quite literally the softest, least offensive option. Alright, I guess we're going to talk about some events that happened during the election. There are really only 3 events that I can think of that I think will broadly that broadly explain the election and kind of how it is. And we'll start this one out with explaining what one of the major issues in the election is, possibly the Guyana-Essequibo dispute. Now, for those of you who have no clue what this is, I talked about it a bit in the past, like when it happened, but basically, here's a little bit of a TLDR in the history of this. There's a lot more history I can go over, but I'm giving you the Cliff Notes version. There is an area known as the Essequibo region, which is an area that has some territorial disputes between Guyana and Venezuela. Basically, it's an area that, like, if you, like, it's a little hard to explain without just going over, like, yeah. In the modern day context, this region is considered Guyana. But, apparently, some historical elements of the past had it technically considered part of Venezuela. And what happened was, because here's how it was. Originally, the divide, because most of the time when you ever do that's always how it works with colonialism and all this stuff. Same reason about, like, look at the U.S. map. If you're an American, remember our map. Think about our maps. Notice how our states in the east, notice how those 13 original colonies, their maps look really wonky, and their states kind of like weirdly like divided, like, Well, that's because a lot of the earliest forms of border disputes that we would have would typically be in regards to rivers. We would typically consider a river essentially a border. And then in the U.S., as we get further and further out, and there are less rivers, we just started drawing squares. And that's apparently how it went for the Essequibo area, because originally the divide between Venezuela and Guyana was the Essequibo River, which would give the Guyana Essequiba to Venezuela. But when the colonialists came down there and was like, let's draw those maps, they started drawing the map, and they made it so that Guyana had everything past the river, or at least a decent part past the river. And it's also because of the people who came to those areas. If I remember correctly, white people went to invade Guyana, like the French and fucking British. Meanwhile, Venezuela and a lot of other Latin American countries, they were colonized by the Spanish. Typically, most of the Latin American countries are colonized by the Spanish, but it's not exclusively. And basically, there's one faction of nationalist Venezuelans that have whined about that ever since. We have this with a lot of other territorial disputes. United Ireland, the Falklands are ours, Ukraine or whatever. We see it all the time. And Guyana and Venezuela, they never really fought on it, if I recall correctly. They never really fought about it, but they definitely made their voices heard about this. And basically what the Guyanese wanted to do was they wanted the UN to officially go, okay, but guys, UN, come down here and officially draw a border, and we can just agree on what the border is, regardless of how it is. If Venezuela's nah, we don't have to do that, man. But that land's ours. No, the land isn't yours, it's ours. Pfft, come on, we don't need to draw a line to explain it. Come on, we know. That's fine. Basically, they were fighting over it without actually fighting over it. And then, soon enough, that area happened to have massive oil reserves. Uh-oh. Yikes. Now, both of these nations want to keep that region a hell of a lot more. And there's a lot of issues that came from that. One of the biggest allegations being how Guyana is allegedly completely controlled, or at least according to some tankies, completely controlled by Western oil reserves because of their close relationship with the West, apparently. I don't recall them ever really having that much of a close relationship with any nation, but whatever. There's always this weird thing, where, they never really, again, they never really did anything with it. Even fucking, Chavez, who's probably one of the most nationalistic fucking Venezuelans I can think of, even he didn't really do anything about it. He did something, but not really, because apparently, when he changed the Venezuelan flag, he included one more star, and that star was because of the Guyana Essequibo region. He's that is our land, but he's not going to do anything about it. And apparently, the reason why is because Fidel Castro literally told him, hey, dude, don't do anything stupid. And he's like, I got you, bro. And he didn't do anything stupid. But Chavez is dead, and so is Fidel. So Maduro was like, hey, Venezuelans, is this land ours? Hey, quick referendum. He literally made a referendum, basically asked 5 questions, and was basically hey, is the deal that says that Venezuela doesn't own this land, is that fake and gay? And they're like, yes. And then he, a couple of ones, is the one that has it so that this region is ours, is that good? Yes. And then he, ironically, there were 5 questions, and the 5th question was basically hey, should we, take this land? And that question, while it still passed overwhelmingly, it was the least popular question. Probably because Venezuelans don't want to go to war. And while Maduro was putting this referendum together, the Guyanese government basically was hey, International Court of Justice, can you, officially do something now, please? And the International Court of Justice was oh wait, no, we have to actually do something, because we live in a post-Russia invasion of Ukraine world, and we understand that sometimes world leaders are just not smart. They just kind of do stupid things for no reason. And then the International Criminal Court, the International Court of Justice, literally said, hey, Maduro, don't do anything stupid. And then Lula came up and said, don't do anything stupid. And now Maduro can't really do anything about it. He did do one thing about it, though. Now he literally considers the Guyana Essequibo region his. He just considers it. It's sort of even less than fucking Chavez. But literally Maduro told them, print new flags of Venezuela that have the Esquiva region as ours, quote, in all schools, public entities, universities, and in all homes in the country. He literally only did this for nationalistic popularity reasons. Like, the Communist Party even went so far, like the good side of the Communist Party, they even went so far as to state that they were afraid that Maduro would do this, and then would use it as a pretext to not hold the election, because that happened in the Ukraine-Russia war. Granted, the wrong country is holding off the elections, apparently, or I guess the right one, depending on your interpretation. The next major event that happened was basically all of the hullabaloo in regards to the Venezuelan opposition's process to pick a candidate. Because this time, if you've seen this channel and you've been watching this video, you know that I do not necessarily have a positive view on the Venezuelan opposition. I've said it before, I've said it again, they're fucking incompetent, they're stupid, they just are... I guess I gotta pull it up again. I gotta pull up the fucking, rants, because I said this in my Discord server as well, as, a perfectly concise way to explain the Venezuelan opposition. I have a more well-rested and more, off-the-cuff and more written-down better version of it in my fucking, in my David Pakman episode, because he gets Venezuelan opposition wrong. But here is a quick overview over every single election that has happened in Venezuela since, or at least, we'll begin with Hugo Chavez's victory. 1998. Chavez won overwhelmingly because there was no prime opposition. The main party kind of was okay, we suck, we're not going to do anything. And then a new political party came up, and so did Chavez's political party come up. And, well, they ended up doing pretty good. Chavez did at least. The 2000 election was when Hugo Chavez implemented the new constitution. He literally created the new system. It was 2 years into his term. And he had a new election. With this new system, there needs to be a new presidential election. One that he won overwhelmingly. Naturally, he does well. Because of the rising he had, very big popularity. And also, the fact that he was able to, do one of the big promises that he did. Reform the Constitution. The 2005 midterms was where we get the first opposition boycott. And surprisingly, the opposition does terribly in that election, because they don't run. The 2006 election, the 2006 presidential election, there's still broadly no coalition, with many of the largest opposition figures opting personally to sit out of the race. And due to that, Hugo Chavez doesn't have any prime opposition candidates. Ergo, he wins. Shock of all shocks. 2010 midterms, there's a united opposition to oppose Hugo Chavez's party. It was just finished. They just finished it. And this was when the Fifth Republic movement was restructured into PSUV, so it was technically weaker, to an extent. And I think this is where the beginnings of Hugo Chavez's health problems started becoming more prominent, and, well, the opposition started doing pretty well. Interesting. Okay. 2012, Chavez is both weak electorally and physically due to his cancer, and the United Opposition picked a very popular governor that not only was he necessarily that bad of a candidate in the fact that he was not a dying man of cancer, but also because of the fact that he actually didn't stray that far away from Hugo Chavez politically. Sure, he was not Hugo Chavez, but he stated that one of the leaders that he looked up to as one of the people, I think it's Henry Caripales, the person who was running against him, if I remember correctly, and he said that one of the leaders that he looked up to was Lula da Silva, a friend of Hugo Chavez. He ran a smart campaign to get people who would back Chavez to kind of think about voting for him. But, of course, Chavez is still incredibly popular, so he wins by a 11-point margin, if I remember correctly. Then he dies, and they hold a 2013 special election with Maduro versus Caripales. Surprisingly, Caripales does really well, and when I say really well, I mean he was there 1 or 2 points away from possibly beating Maduro. And that's because, quite literally, Maduro was just not popular, and Caripales was. many of the people who would probably be considered right-wing Chavismos would probably felt inclined to vote for fucking Garipelas this time around. Like, okay, now we can do this. And this reinvigorates the opposition coalition, which leads to them running a united front against PSUV in the 2015 Venezuelan midterms. And that led to them finally beating PSUV. Then the 2018 election rolls around, and they decide it's time to boycott. Granted, there were a lot of candidates that couldn't run, that they wanted to run, but they just said, no, we're just not going to run a candidate at all. And surprisingly, they do bad. Oh, wow, who would have guessed? Then the 2020 midterms, there was a bigger problem. A lot of the biggest name candidates chose to not run at all. But then there was a divided opposition, which lost as well. So my hopes were not really looking good for the fucking opposition to actually do anything interesting. But they did actually try. For one, the Democratic Unity Roundtable, which used to be the prime opposition, or like the major opposition, a reformation of opposition figures and parties, formed into a new opposition coalition, the Unity Platform, literally even taking one of the fucking like major other like anti-Democratic Unity Roundtable parties. Like one of the major reasons why they wouldn't be able to do well was because the Democratic Alliance and the Democratic Unity Roundtable were both running against each other, when they should have been running with each other. And one major faction of the Democratic Alliance went to join the Unity Platform. And yeah, a lot of the major opposition figures joined the Democratic Unity Party platform, and boom, yeah, they were doing really good. They ran in like some form of the midterms. They didn't do that well, but they did like fine. And they were actually, yeah, when the presidential election rolls around, we're going to find a viable candidate who is popular among the majority of the Venezuelans, and we will run them, and we'll make sure they have a big chance to run against Maduro. Alright. They might actually pull something off. After a long process, the party was united. They all agreed the best choice to run against Maduro, need I say they are? Marina Corina Machado. Wait a second. That's not the person that I named before. What the fuck? Who is this woman? Well, she was the person who was supposed to be their nominee. Then, Jose Brito called into question something that has been prevailingly used against Venezuelan opposition figures. Allegations of corruption and possibly wanting to dismantle the government. And his accusation came from the fact that she was a supporter of Juan Guaido. But the question was, what kind of support did she give? Like, how supportive was she? Because this is one of the big things, like I said before, when Juan Guaido was just simply criticizing Maduro and wanted Maduro to step down, he was free as a bird. He could do whatever the fuck he wanted. Then when he started doing the thing like calling for Maduro's assassination and calling for the military to turn on him, that's when he started getting attacked. And basically it's like, they wanted to see like, Marina, did you support all of this, or did you jump off at a certain point? And now that this issue was raised, the Venezuelan court literally just said, you know what? We can't risk it. You're banned. I also think I should mention the fact that she also allegedly claimed that she supported sanctions against Venezuela, which is apparently a no-no. So, yeah, the accusations were enough. It's like, good enough for us. Bye-bye. But the Unitary Platform could pick a different nominee. They were still allowed the chance to pick a different nominee. When they even though the election was like close, like they fought for it. Like Marina fought for her place on the ballot. But as the election deadline drew closer, she's like, okay, we don't have any other options. I have to give my ballot line to someone else. Someone else has to run. And you know what? They looked hard. They found the perfect person. Marina literally told them, the perfect person. Here is who exactly I want to run. And that's how the party decided to unite behind, say it with me now, Corina Yoris. Wait, that's also not the name. Who's this person? Corina Yoris is a right-wing Venezuelan philosopher. And she was chosen to be the nominee of the Venezuelan opposition. She was ready. She went to the place at the exact date and time that you're supposed to go. She went to the place, and then what ended up happening is, according to Yoris, she was literally just told no. Like, she tried to, like, be like, I'm here to, like, announce I'm here to sign the papers to not run, and they just told her no. And they wouldn't let her in. And it's like, what? They literally just fucking forbade her from running. And, like, she didn't have a reason. Her record was clean. And she was just banned from running. And that led to a lot of people to criticize that fact. What the fuck? Why is she not allowed to run? And that even led to backlash, because she did this the day of the filing deadline. She was technically, the party technically shouldn't have a nominee right now. But after backlash, they gave them a 1-day extension to pick a new nominee. And that's why we got Edmundo as the candidate. Because literally, as I said before, he is literally the safest option. He worked for Chavez, so literally, it's just like, that's it. That's all we need. Speaking of all we need, there was one more thing that happened during the election cycle that similarly had a lot of expectations and whatever. The U.S.'s deal with Maduro. That's an interesting title. In the wake of the Russian invasion of Ukraine, the U.S. faced higher gas prices because we stopped trading and getting Russian oil. But now, we need a large amount of oil. Guys, we need oil fast. We need our gas, we need that. We need that shit now. We go to our buddy Saudi Arabia, they won't give it to us. We go to Mexico, they won't give it to us either. Hola, es me, Maduro. And Biden started actually having talks with Maduro to get that oil. A vastly different way to get oil than Donald Trump did. So what ended up happening was Venezuela came to the U.S. with demands. You want our oil? Well, it's going to be a little hard to trade oil to you if we're sanctioned by you. Interesting. You think maybe we could lift those sanctions real quick? But the U.S. was a little hesitant to do that because they didn't want to give Venezuela lifted sanctions because they ideally felt like they needed to be punished for the bad things they did. So they told Maduro, we'll lift the sanctions, but you're going to need to fix this election, baby. And Maduro's like, okay, what am I supposed to do? And he's like, not to us. We'll be there, but you got to talk to those guys, pointing out the Unitary platform. Fuck. And, well, they reached an agreement, all three of them together, that Maduro, sanctions would be lifted on the condition that Maduro would hold free and fair elections and allowing international observers to view the election. And yeah, when this first came out, I was ecstatic. I was like, fucking amazing. Yes, this would be great. Because literally, it was like, I genuinely don't believe that Maduro could lose if he was running as a fair candidate. He might lose, but there's a chance that he could win. I think that he's still riding on the Chavismo wave a lot. Literally, everybody wins in this scenario. Sanctions are lifted from Venezuelans, and it'll help Venezuelans get out of poverty. Alright. Free and fair elections, which will safeguard and help protect Venezuelan democracy. Alright. The United States gets oil. Alright. Literally, everything looks like it's hunky-dory. But I didn't think that the deal would last because of one major problem. And that was one of the big agreements of this. Alright? Because this deal was reached after MORENA was put to jail. So what happens to MORENA? does she get to run in this election? Or does she not get to run? Because this happened afterwards. Like, oh, starting now we'll do this stuff. And according to the Unitary platform, the agreement meant that she would be able to run. And according to PSUV, the agreement made nothing of the sort. And that's when I knew that the deal would not last. And sadly, it did not. Because in April of 2024, Biden pulled back on the deal, claiming Maduro wasn't keeping his end of the bargain. Again, probably because of the issues of Machado and Lloris, which is why, again, they picked the least offensive candidate to run, so they wouldn't face any issues. Alright, let's go to some polling. Polls are very interesting because in Venezuela, a lot of the main opposition, like main pollsters, are anti-Chavismo. So all those polls have Gonzalez winning. But again, like, news orgs are biased against Maduro and Chavez. Not nearly that surprising that they do it. And they don't poll that many people, unfortunately. That's one of the big problems with polls. If they don't poll a lot of people, then really, what are you showing? But apparently, a funny incident happened thanks to the polling issues. It turns out that new pollsters have randomly started forming in Venezuela, and all of them conveniently predicting a PSUV landslide. Wow, color me shocked. I wonder what's going on. Interesting. And now it's time for the part where we reach the conclusion/support part. I got nothing. I would love to be enthusiastic for socialism and Chavismo and socialism in the 21st century to win in fucking Venezuela. I would absolutely love that. But Maduro is literally below mid on my pink tide rankings, so I am not really happy. I'm barely enthused about the opposition. The closest thing you'd get to me having an endorsement is that I hope that the fucking, Communist Party endorsed candidate does well. And no, not Maduro, the other one. Do I believe the election will be rigged? No, not necessarily. That depends on your definition of rigged. What does an election being rigged mean? I guess that's your interpretation of, what does that mean? But I will tell you one thing. I know for 100% certainty if an election will be rigged. I will tell you right here, right now. If this happens, the election is 100% rigged. If Maduro gets over 10 million votes, the election is 100% rigged. The reason being, that's how many votes, and it's one of the main reasons why I also don't believe that Hugo Chavez rigged the elections. Because during one of his presidential campaigns, Hugo Chavez ran very much on the idea that he would get 10 million voters. He would get 10 million votes, which would literally be the entire voting population of Venezuela. He claimed he would get 10 million votes, that he would be so popular that literally 10 votes. That was literally one of his campaign songs, 10 millones son 10. That was one of his big campaign slogans. One of the most famous Chavismo songs, that he was going to get 10 million votes. And he did not get them in any of his elections. The Esquiva referendums did get over 10 million votes each. Although, to be fair, the Venezuelan opposition didn't oppose that. They love that because they're also nationalists. But anyways, that's pretty much all I gotta say on that. Hopefully, Venezuela will actually get to elect an actual Chavismo candidate at some point in the future. Thanks for watching this video. Be sure to like, comment, share, subscribe, and click the bell to be notified when a future video mine comes out. And if you need more content from me, you can go to my website, follow me on Twitter, join my Discord, or consider supporting me on Patreon.